So to start off, my name is Amanda Esmeyer. I am a sophomore at McGuanago High School. I am the strategy lead on Team 930, and this is going to be my second year on the team. So just a little bit about Team 930. Charged Up was 930's 22nd year as a team, so we've been around for a little bit. We won 2 out of the 3 regional competitions that we attended in 2023, and we won Engineering Inspiration at Pittsburgh.
And actually, I'm Laura Piwan. I am the strategy mentor for Team 930, and I just basically let her go and do.
Perfect. Is it working?
Down arrow.
Yeah.
There you go.
Woo, it's working. All right, wonderful. To get started off, kind of what we're going to be going over today, our agenda. We're going to start up with the purpose of scouting. So, what's match scouting? What's pit scouting? Why do you do it? What data you should be getting out of it? Then we're going to talk about scouting breakdown. So, how we run our scouts, like the amount of people we have, the kind of time frames with sessions and stuff, and then how we prepare our scouters and train them before they get to competition. And then we'll talk about how we determine our scouting metrics, so determining what we actually want to track. And then we'll go over how to use your scouting data, how to like just use it to the best of its ability in match strategy and different aspects of the game. And we're gonna talk about how this year we implemented a thing called SQL. It's a programming language. It's kind of a work in progress for us, but we'll kind of share how we use it this year, and some tips if you guys are interested in using it as well. And then we'll go over pick list creation, what our pick list meeting looks like, kind of the time frame, when you should do it, what it should look like, how many lists you have, stuff like that. So getting started, let's talk about the purpose of match scouting. So what is match scouting? Essentially, it's watching a match and tracking metrics to see how a robot performs. So that the metrics that your scouters are going to track, they can involve qualitative data, like you see some examples up there, like defense, like we use driver confidence this year. And then it can also be quantitative, so like how many game pieces people are scoring, and just any like metrics that involve numbers is going to be in the quantitative category. Something really important when you're thinking about match scouting is that you don't want to miss any matches. You need to scout every single match. When looking at the data side of scouting, so obviously you're scouting and you're collecting data. For us, we use a Google Sheets thing, which you can see up here. But if you miss a scouting match, it could mess up your data, and you can miss like really good teams that you aren't gonna look at because you missed the matches that they're scouting. So for us, we run things like averages and counts, and say a robot's doing very good. They're scoring like 8 pieces. They're filling up the whole grid. That's 9, I think, actually. But and then we miss a match that they're in. We're gonna miss that match. And we're gonna have no idea how they compare to a robot that scores like 8 as well, and if they are consistent. So you just need that data to not hurt you in the long run. Some things that you don't want to track. So another thing that can mess up your data is like confusing metrics. Scouters can and will find the most like cryptic and confusing ways to mess up your scouting data. So subjective questions and like scouter opinion questions are not going to get you the best data that you want. So when you're deciding your metrics, like stay away from things that are opinion based. Like don't just ask a team like if they like a robot. That's not going to give you good data, and it's not going to be useful towards you in the long run. So try to stick to more fact based and like numbers based. It's going to give you better data, and you're going to be able to use it better while you're trying to win a competition. So, moving on to pit scouting. So basically, what pit scouting is, it's just going from team to team in a pit and asking them about their physical robot. It's usually a good idea to do this type of pit scouting like the practice day of competitions, so the day before competition like actually starts. This will like give you a separation between like when you're talking to a bunch of teams and when you're trying to actually run your matches. And we all know the stress of that Friday day that you're actually running everything. Just it will help a lot if you do it the day before and it's just out of your way, and it's not going to be a big deal for that. When you're pit scouting, some of the things you're going to want to track, we normally stick to like drivetrain, dimensions, like they're like auto capabilities for most of our pit scouting questions. This is the time that you're going to get to know data about not just how a robot performs, but their like integrity of the robot, and just how durable they are and how they're going to withstand like a competition that has a bunch of matches. So asking things like auto can give you a good idea of what they're trying to run, and then you can compare that to your match data and see if they're actually like successfully running those autos that they tell you that they're going to run. So going along with match scouting, it's super important to pit scout every single team. This is the same thing as match scouting. If you miss out on a whole team with pit scouting and all of a sudden you get to pick list and you're like, who is this team, you have no idea. And you're not going to get to use any of those data points. You have no idea what type of drive chain they have or any of these other questions that you're asking because you didn't pit scout them. And when we pit scout, we also do we take pictures of each robot. We found that it's super helpful. So like when we're in pick list, we have all of our photos in like a Google folder drive thing. That if somebody mentions a robot, we can just pull up a picture of the robot, so people have more like a recognition type thing, so everybody's on the same page of who we're talking about. That made it a lot more helpful for us because then we're all on the same page during pick list. So when we go around and pit scouting, we normally have a veteran member and then like a rookie member, and we try to stay away from like newer students doing it because we just want students to go around who are going to have an idea of what questions they're asking. So like electromechanical kids or programming kids are going to have a lot more understanding of the questions that they're asking. If you ask more like a business kid or on the side of like the back end of your team, they're not going to know the type of like mechanisms that go behind robots. So you're just going to get more data if you have like more experienced students. So I know I talked about this with match scouting, but things not to track. Again, subjective questions. Teams will exaggerate their data in pit scouting. So like if you're talking to a team and they tell you that they have like 100 working autopaths, that's not going to be as truthful as you might think. Teams want to look good to you, especially if you're on the higher level of teams. So just always take pit data with like a grain of salt. Yeah, make sure that you're like in the back of your head, just be truthful. All right, so let's get into like a scouting breakdown, so like a more detailed explanation of scouting. This is how 930 and many other teams scout. It's pretty much a tried and true method, and with some modification, it should work with however your team runs your scouting. So what we do is we have 6 scouters, so you see six six kids up there, and then 6 robots on the field, one for each robot. Obviously, 3 red, 3 blue makes things super simple. For us, we have like 3 or 4 things that make our scouting successful. So the first thing that we do is we have scouting schedules. So for us, it's really helpful for us to have a schedule with who's in the pit, who's scouting. Then there's no confusion when it comes up to maybe it's like 10:01 and the next shift of scouters needs to come through. You can just look who is scheduled to do it, and you know who's supposed to scout. There's no confusion, and there should be no hard feelings because then you rotate through everybody and everybody's scouting a similar amount. We also do scouting training, which I'll kind of break down a little bit in a second. But the gist of it is that we talk to our scouters before they get to competition, so they know exactly how to scout. We don't just want to like throw a scouter into a competition and they have no idea what they're doing. It's just going to create confusion, and your data is not going to be as good with that. So another thing we talk about is seating. So seating is super important. When you're scouting, visibility is so important. Normally for us, or at least for this year, we try to aim for like the middle area of whatever bleachers or stands that you're on, and then a little bit higher, so you just have like a better view of where you're going. To look for seating, the day before is usually a good idea. Like after you're done pit scouting, you can go into the stands and kind of like survey your area of what you're trying to do, and then you have a good idea for the next day of where you're gonna sit, and it's all easy. So and the last thing I have to talk about this is that for us, we use these tablets. If you want to look, they're just like Amazon Fire tablets, but not every kid has a phone to like do scouting on, and not every and paper and pencils is like really hard to sort through, and it's just gonna make you like a lot harder in the long run. So we set aside a budget for these, but we just bought I think it was 8 or 10 of these tablets, and now we have them for all of our scouters. And our app is on these tablets, so then we just have it for that, and our kids aren't distracted with their phones as they're trying to scout. So to make scouting easier for everybody, we had these match cheat sheets that we made, which essentially think of like blue lines with all of the matches listed down. It was just like red scouter one, and then it had all the matches, and it had the teams that were in like that position for each of that match. We could have our kids just like cross out the matches they went along, and it just made it super simple because we had my kids scouting the completely wrong robot at some situations. So just having those made it simple for everybody, and our data was better in the long run because we weren't having multiple matches of scouting the same robot, or people would miss completely different robots.
So to clarify that each kid gets different tablets. You know,
Yeah.
red 1, red 2, red 3. Okay. Well, they're supposed to scout position 1. but sometimes they don't know which position one is, and they, like she said,
Yeah.
they scout the wrong robot.
Mhm.
So what was the one big caveat of this wonderful cheat sheet?
So the cheat sheet obviously it had the schedule on it, but you don't get the schedule to like that Thursday night of competition. So we had to manually type out what we were all of it, and it was just a hassle. But it made it so much better in the long run. So I would recommend
It gave us a lot better,
yeah,
better accurate data because
definitely.
then we're not having kids scouting the wrong robot.
Yeah. So, anyways. Moving on to scouting training. So, as we all know, the field season can get very hectic, especially getting closer to competitions. So, being this, it can be extremely hard to like talk to your scouters, especially if you're in charge of like your scouting for your team. But it's so important that you have this conversation with these scouters. For us, we made a presentation. You can kind of see it on the top right there. We just labeled it Scouter Training. But basically, we had a Google Slides presentation that outlined expectations, timing, and just like how our scouting was going to work. We had screenshots of like our app, so then they knew how they were going to do it. And then as we gave this presentation, we had each kid have a tablet and go through our app as they went through it. Um, when you're doing the scouting training presentation, it's very important that you don't miss any scouters. So I remember doing this presentation like at least 10 times because you do it in groups, so then it's not all at once, so people are more focused. And some people were gone, so you have to redo it again. But it's so important that you do this, and it made it so we had less questions, less confusion as we got to actual scouting. So I recommend that you at least have a conversation with your scouters, at least like lay out expectations, and it's gonna make your lives a whole lot easier. And in the batch of very good scouters, I know you guys probably have some good scouters if you run your scouting. There always will be those couple troublesome scouters, and don't be afraid to like go back and talk to them. You want to have open communication with your scouters because we know that scouting is not always the most fun thing to do in the world, but it's really important, and you always want to have that good communication. So if something's not working, you're talking about it, and just being a good human to your scouters is gonna go a long way. So we also scout with other teams at competitions. So when we do this, we just give them our scouting training presentation, like we just send it over to them, and they can do their own training with their own scouters, and then we have less questions. So if you do scout with other teams, make sure to send over at least something that explains your system, because then it's gonna make your life a whole lot easier. So we have like three main things that we do talk about our scouters with, especially with like expectations and behaviors when they're on their shifts. We have that they're on time, which means like early, so 5 to 10 minutes early. That they're focused on robots the whole time. So this goes along with the third one. So they have no phones while they're doing it, and they don't have their AirPods in. It's gonna give you better data, and your scouters. It's only an hour that they're scouting, so it's not like they're gonna be sitting there for 6 hours. Yeah, it's just gonna give you better if you outline those expectations like those. All right, so let's talk about how.
Amanda.
Yeah. Oh, hi Matt.
All right. So for working with other teams,
Yeah.
do you have any way
Go
to
back.
confirm that they actually do scouting training?
it's it's mostly just like the trustness. Like we have a conversation with them like through email or we'll call them and we're just like, hey, we need you to do this if you want your data. And we can obviously tell like if they get to competition that their scouters have no idea what they're doing. Um, but you kind of just have to trust what they're doing.
And
sometimes.
as me, I'm always watching the data as it comes in.
Mhm.
So I'm kind of saying, okay, you're not getting this right for some reason. I was like, okay, you swap these two numbers, or so there is an element of we are still watching the data that's coming in.
Mhm.
But yeah, that it is just a lot of we are building this scouting alliance. We are also building using that bit of trust.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense, sort of. Okay. Um, let's talk about how we determine our scouting metrics and some tips of how you guys should determine your scouting metrics. So if you're unfamiliar with metrics, essentially they're just like the tracked fields of a game. So your metrics should cover all aspects of the 2 minutes and 30 seconds that are given for each match. So that's auto, teleop, and endgame. So when you're first having this conversation, so this screenshot is from when we talked about at kickoff, and it was our first field of metrics that we did. You want to have this discussion, the either kickoff or like week one, so you're having a good implications of what you're going to be talking about in like 6 weeks down the line. So when you're having this conversation, you don't want to just be thinking in the present. Okay, what did the game announcement show? You want to be thinking 6 weeks down the line. the averages, the counts, and just the data that you want to be seeing that's going to make you successful in your competitions. You're going to want to like put that all, like think about it all. I know it's hard, but try to think in the future and not just like in the present for that. So like our first, how we broke this down, we just had our like first ones at the top, which are the easy ones. What team are you scouting? What match number are you scouting? But then we like broke it into auto, teleop, and endgame. So when the game manual or game announcement came up, we saw that they had there was mobility, there was charge station, they were scoring on all the nodes at least for this past year. So you need a metric for each one of those, because you don't want to miss any aspects of the game, because like then you're not going to know any data if you don't like scout how many game pieces they're scoring on a certain row. So but along with that, you don't want to overwhelm your scouters. You don't want to have, like, for us, it's like 30 metrics ish that we want them to use. More than 30 is going to make your scouters overwhelmed and confused as they're trying to go like about their data and their scouting. It's going to be a lot simpler for everybody if you try to keep your metrics to a minimum, but obviously don't try to put a million metrics in there. And it's not going to look good. Yeah. So probably the most important thing that you'll learn about metrics as you go along is that it's okay to like change them. For us, our first competition was at Midwest this year, week 2, and our last was at Houston, week 8. Our scouting systems and our metrics looked completely different as we went along, and that's completely okay. We figured out what was important to us at Picklist, so what metrics were we actually using when we were making those decisions, and then we took out the ones that we didn't need and that we didn't want in there. And that's so important that you change it, and it's going to make it a lot easier for everybody if you take away those metrics that are confusing and don't give you any benefit for that. So, yes. All right, quantitative versus qualitative metrics. So it's important to have both of these in your scouting data, but when talking about quantitative metrics, there are some good resources for you guys to use. So I hope we're all kind of familiar with Blue Alliance. If you're not, it's basically at a regional, there's rankings, they're all in Blue Alliance, there's teams, what awards they win, stuff like that, but it also has good match data that you could pull from it. um, so like Blue Alliance can have like how many teams each team got when they won, how many teams losing got if I could speak. And then Statbotics is kind of like it's like sister thing, but Statbotics was basically a little bit of background on this, if I can find where I put it. It was created by a student at Yale and a former alumni of Team 5511. It basically takes Blue Alliance data and then sorts it into even better sorted data. You can't use Statbotics at like a week 1 event because you're not going to have team data from that year. But as you go along further along the season, Statbotics is going to have really good data that you could put up teams against each other, and it can basically predict who wins that match. It's just going to give you a lot of resources that Statbotics is amazing, and you should use it if you're looking for good quantitative data.
Statbotics uses a lot of really good trending algorithms, and that's how they get really good at trying to determine who's going to win the next regional. You can look to see what does Statbotics, who does Statbotics think's going to win based on the previous regionals trends.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. So if you haven't looked at Statbotics after like week 1 or week 2, go look at Statbotics and see where you rank or where your team ranks or where the other teams rank. It's pretty cool.
Even look it up now, like if you want to see like who was the best team in California in last year's game. It will have it on there. It will rank all the teams for you. It's an amazing resource and really good for everybody. And then this year we tried to focus a little bit more on qualitative data, so we wanted to have a good balance between both. So driver confidence up here and field awareness kind of go together, but these were the qualitative data metrics that we tracked. So driver confidence is literally exactly what it sounds. So we scouted the robots on how like confident their driver was, like how they're moving across the field. Were they bumping into things? Were they messing up their alliance? Did they go on the charge station at the last 2 seconds and then mess up the climb? Stuff like that. And then we changed this qualitative metric into a quantitative data point. So we made driver confidence ranked on a scale of 1 to 3. 1 being the best, 3 being the worst, I think, or it flipped. Oops. And then this data point we could use, we could track averages. So the data went into our Google Sheets, and we could literally just like change the thing, and it could rank, okay, who had the best driver confidence, who had the worst. It was in a line that was so effective for us to see teams, especially when thinking about like a second pick robot. then you know who's not gonna like cause any trouble on the field. If you have qualitative data points like this, you can also do this with like defense quality. We rank this on a scale of 1 to 3. So if you're looking for a good defense spot or you want to be a good defense spot, just focus on how confident you are, how you're executing your role on the field, and teams are going to look for that.
And one of the other things about the driver confidence, we had a completely separate person scouting that. Mm-hmm. We had like a red alliance and a blue alliance. So we, in addition to our 6, we had 2 additional scouters. Mm-hmm. So it is very scouter intensive, but this kind of metric does help break out the best teams.
Yeah, and then at Houston we put it all together. I think we had it in there. But yeah, it was definitely a good addition to our scouting this year, and I recommend it for everybody. All right, let's go ahead and talk about some good versus bad scouting metrics. I know the answers are already on the board, but let's kind of talk about why do you think did they score well would be a bad data point. Does anybody have any ideas? What was that? It could be, yeah, very vague. It's not going to give you like good data, and it's also subjective. So like one scouter could say, yeah, they scored well. They scored 4 pieces, but another person could say, no, they scored 4 pieces. That's not a lot. So it's just subjective, and you're not going to get any good data point from that because like that's not going to help you when determining from 2 really similar teams. What about, did you like this team? Does anybody have an idea why this could be a bad metric? Yeah. Yeah, subjective. Perfect. Pretty self-explanatory like the last one, but it could depend on who's a scouter, who's going to like a team or not. So yeah, I would avoid that metric at all points. What about did they win this match? Perfect. Exactly. Blue Alliance is all this data. Athletics is all this data. You don't want to waste or like put more metrics in there just to have them if you can get them from a completely outside source. And it's not. It doesn't really matter if a team won a match. It matters how they're contributing to their alliance and what they're doing. You don't really need that. What about how did they score? With the description. Why is this a good data point? Maybe. If not, I can just explain it. No, I don't know. Okay, well, how did they score well is, yeah.
It's better because instead of did they score well, you can put a description.
Yeah. This still isn't an amazing data point, but it's definitely a better option than like did they score well. You're gonna get more like just a description. You're gonna get more why did they score well? What did they do that made them like good that they did score well? So just more descriptive, you know. What about comments field? Why is this a good metric? That's the word. Anybody? Yeah.
You can add in maybe special things that happen during the match that you don't track normally. Maybe the guy's disabled or they tipped over.
Perfect. Love it. Yeah, and the comments field, we also like to use it for like kind of like our fact check. So if we see a robot that's doing really good throughout the day, maybe they're filling up the top row every single time, and all of a sudden there's one match where they say 0 scored and they didn't do anything. Well, you look at that data and then you look at their comments, and maybe their comment says that was the best robot out there, like they did so good. That doesn't match up with their data that was scored, so obviously something happened between translation, and you can just avoid that match completely. But again, like she said, it's really good to add extra comments that you're not going to have a whole metric dedicated to. What about describing defense? Any ideas? Maybe? No, that's okay. We did use this metric in the past. Describing defense is just a hard thing to track. And honestly, you can change this kind of subjective question into a quantitative metric. So like in this past year, we described our defense or we rated it on a scale of 1 to 3. It was a lot easier for us to just like track it, to like look at it in our data, and it just made everything a lot easier if you have like numbers associated with it. So yes. Love it. This slide in itself is very overwhelming. But essentially, what you should get out of this slide is it's so important to not overwhelm your scatters. So this is from the 2020 game, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
So on the left side, I know my hurts from left. You see 19 metrics. So compared to the right side, where there's 56 metrics on the board, look how congested like here looks, and you're not going to want to be a scouter that's trying to click tiny buttons on the screen and try to do that. It's so much better to have less metrics that are more condensed, and you're just going to get better data if you're not overwhelming your scouters by having less data points. So less the better. All right, So let's talk about how we use our scouting data. So why are you putting all this effort into scouting? What should you be getting out of this? There are a couple main points that you really want to utilize your scouting data in. So the first and probably my favorite way to use your scouting data is match strategy. So in match strategy, you can use your data to find the strengths of your alliance versus the weaknesses of the alliance that you're against. So you can use your scouting data to find, okay, we can score on the top really well, but the other team can't pick up cones from on the ground. You can use that in your match strategy to be like, okay, how do we prevent them from scoring the most? It's so important that you use your data, that you know the alliance that you're going up against by using your data, and it's just going to make your match strategy a lot better. And you're going to be more likely to win the match if you're utilizing the resources that you just scouted for. Another thing that you can use your scouting data for, so as I said earlier, Blue Alliance ranks all the robots at the competition that you're at, but high ranks don't always mean the best teams. So a team could have like a really, really easy schedule that day and they could be ranked super high, or a really good team could have a harder schedule and rank super low. It just depends, and you can fact check this rankings by just using your data. So like maybe you want to find a first pick that scores the most at the whole competition. Then you can use your data to look at this, and it could be a team that's ranked like 24th, but they're actually like the second best scorer at the competition. Utilize your data and fact check everything that you see. So, and then the last thing that kind of you should really, really use your scouting data for is pick lists. We'll go over like a more detailed explanation of that in a second, but your data is used to find who complements you the best, who are you going to work well with, and who are you going to score the most points from. So like on the bottom, you can see like who scores the best, who defends the best, but it definitely depends on the year what you're doing, what you're going to be looking for. Because maybe one year a second robot you're looking for a defense bot, but like next year you're using and you want to just have people that score. So using your data to sort by and using averages is going to get you a way better idea of what robots you have in this competition and how you can utilize them to the best of your ability. So use your data. That's the main point here. All right, and let's talk about match strategy here. So this is definitely my favorite part of being on strategy, being able to talk to other teams and just like make connections with other teams. So what match strategy kind of meant to 930 this year, it was like me and my driver going out to talk to the three teams that we were on, or two other teams that we were on the lines with, and we just had a conversation with them. We to talk about what's our plan for this match? What are we doing for auto? What are we doing for teleop? When are we going up for endgame? Basically, the three questions we had to answer. It's so important that you have all your partners there when you're doing match strategy. You don't want to have another like you're with one of your teams when you don't talk to that third robot. You're not that robot's gonna have no idea what they're gonna want to do. So having at least a conversation with them, maybe it's 2 minutes before you go on the field, it's just gonna make everybody's lives a lot easier if you're talking to them before it. So kind of split your discussion into three separate points. So auto, teleop, and endgame. That's the 3 points of a game. It's going to make the most sense to talk about those 3 points. So in auto, it should be pretty much self-explanatory as you go farther along in the season at least. But you want to make sure that you're avoiding any collisions and you just know how many points you're going to score, or at least attempting to score. So just ask their team what they're comfortable running. Fact check it with your data. So say a team like says we can run our auto balance, we've been doing it for whatever, which is going on this charge station and balancing. And then you fact check your data and you're like, wow, they've missed every single time. Well, then you can have a different team do it. So use your data with this. But yeah, auto, just make sure there's no collisions and you're not going to lose points for hitting robots. And then teleop. There are so many different like options you can choose when talking about teleop. So you could have like teams play in zones, have a defense bot, have people go in lines and just like avoid each other. But you want to have this conversation because you want to know what are you going to tell your drivers, what are you going to tell your human players to do in the match. So just make sure everybody's on the same page and they know where they're going, basically. And endgame, there's like 2 parts that endgame. This discussion should be pretty much self-explanatory when you go into it, but just knowing at least for endgame, what time are we going up to get these points? Who is? Are we having all three robots go up? Is it only 2 robots? And like what time and what order are you going to be going up? It should be super easy, but just making sure that there's that clear communication and we have a plan and you stick to it is going to be the main point here. So again, just use your data, fact check everything that those teams are saying, and use like Statbotics to predict your outcome if you really want to do that too. All right, so let's talk about Bear Scouts. Bear Scouts is our app that we use that we have on these tablets, but it's 930 Scouting app, we made it a couple years ago, but it's a customizable app, and you can create many data points. So we have like drop downs, text boxes, pictures on there. But we really like it. It's edited through a JSON file. We'd be happy to share it with any of you guys if you guys have any questions. But essentially, how it works is a scouter scouts the match. They save it up in that top right corner, and then it saves it to here, and you can click on those little arrows right there, and it will pull up a QR code that we can scan, and then we scan it into our database. It's super simple. We love it. Use QR codes, and it's super simple to edit too. So if anybody wants to see it at the end, I have it on these tablets up here. But yeah, it's basically the gist of it. All right, let's talk about SQL. So this year was the first year that 930 implemented SQL into our scouting and our strategy. But if you're unfamiliar with SQL or SQL, it stands for Structured Query Language, and it's essentially just a programming language. But it's an industry standard tool, and this year we use it alongside of our Google Sheets database. So we created tables and things called stored procedures in SQL that matched up with each of our metrics that we had in Google Sheets. And we use a thing called an SSIS package, or a server integration, or SQL Server Integration Services, which is basically like, think of like a transport, like a big train from our first database to our SQL database. And that's how we got our data through each. It was like a big transportation service. But yeah, we really liked it this year. Laura over here, she works with it at her work, and she was the one who implemented it. But you can write separate queries, and basically the most factor that we love from it is that you can like deeper analyze your data, because you're writing queries that make you say, okay, I want all the teams here who auto balance this many times. Well, you can write it into a query, and it will pull all those teams up for you, and then you have your pick list right there from just a data point that you can pull up. So another thing we did with SQL this year was that we had kind of an offshoot that we used. It was an analytical web app that was created by another one of our mentors, but it's hosted. The SQL that we hosted is hosted in an AWS cloud or an Amazon cloud. So basically, what it did is it helps us combine our scouting data with the Blue Alliance data. So up here, this top screenshot, the red, blue, and the green are essentially like the low scoring, mid scoring, and high scoring, and then that black line is auto scoring. So we could pull up whatever team that we wanted to look at our competition, and we had all of their data right there, along with their pit scouting data that's below there. So it just made our life a lot easier. It has fun colors, so we liked it. If anybody's interested, you can talk to me at the end about it if you want to go deeper into it. All right, and let's talk about the last thing we're going to go over today. So all of your scouting data accumulates into one meeting, your pick list meeting. So if you're unfamiliar with the pick list meeting, normally teams will take their scouters together, their drive team together, and have a conversation that Friday night of the competition to be like, okay, alliance selection is in the morning. What's our plan? Like, we need a pick list. We need to know who we want to get picked by, or who we're picking if you're in that captain position. But basically, what your pick list discussion should look like is everyone on your team should have a voice in this discussion. So for us, it looked like we had our whole team come together, and we had people like voice their opinions. Okay, who should we pick? Who do we want to get picked by? And then we broke it down into a small group of like 10 to 15 people, because we found that less people makes pick lists a whole lot easier, because you're not gonna be sitting there at 1 in the morning and still doing a pick list list. Less people was a lot easier, and you want to have people from like all aspects of your team, so like mechanical, programming, drive team, and of course scouters. You want to have people that know what they're doing and know who else at their competition is doing stuff that you're looking for. So when you're having this discussion, a pick list discussion, you want to determine your strengths versus your weaknesses, and you want to find teams that complement those weaknesses. So maybe you can only score on the bottom row. Let's take this last game for example. Well, you're gonna want to get picked by teams, or pick teams that can score on those top 2 rows and get you all those points that you want. So sorting your data, that who scored on the top rows, who scored on the middle rows, is gonna find you the best team. It's gonna give you the best options to like win the competition. And categorizing these teams is gonna make your life a whole lot easier. So categorize who do you want to pick first, who do you want to pick second. Don't flip those, because maybe you're like an 8th captain and you really want a good defense spot for one of your picks, but then you pick them first. As it gets back around to you, you're not gonna have that first pick robot that you want that's gonna score better. So just having your priorities in a line in your pick list and having a structured meeting is going to make your life a lot easier. So with categorizing, let's talk about this. So when you start with your base list, so maybe some people on your team may be like, hey, I really like this robot. Let's talk about them. You want to take a look at those closer bots that you've decided that you've picked out of these group of 60 bots. Now you have like 10. So you want to deeper analyze these robots by using your scouting data. So comparing final rankings on Blue Alliance versus how you rank them in the certain metrics that you're looking for. It's going to give you a lot better it's going to give you an easier discussion if you're categorizing like who's the best defense bot, who's the best scoring bot. Because normally in a game that's going to be what you're looking for, but it could be different. It just depends on the game. But make sure again you use your scouting data. It's gonna give your life a whole lot easier. And remember that ranks don't mean anything. So if you scout something special in a team and they're ranked like 47th, don't be afraid to pick them. If you've scouted something special in them, trust your gut and pick the team that you've scouted something special for. And then let's talk about our last thing, which is a very fun aspect of pick lists. Let's talk about schmoozing. So maybe your pick list is done and now it's Saturday morning and you're ranked sort of low and you want to get picked by a high team. You want to talk to the teams that you want to get picked by. So discuss what do you value to their alliance. This is called schmoozing. So it's like the team flirting or like networking with the teams of higher teams, or I said that wrong, but like the higher teams you want to get picked by. So you want to have a conversation, discuss what they're looking for, discuss how you bring value to their alliance. Why would they pick you out of 40 other teams that are there? Like let them know that you're interested. You can do this to multiple teams. Maybe go to the first 3 or 4 teams that you want to get picked by. But use your data to compare. So like have data that backs up what you're saying. So maybe you say we can fill the whole bottom row. So use your data, show them, give them examples of like what match you did, and say that like, hey, we have a match like coming up next. Go watch us, and we'll do this thing that you guys are looking for. But just be totally honest. Like, don't tell a team that you can do something like insane and crazy that you can't actually do, because it's not good to lie. So always be honest. But yeah, let's talk about what we talked about. That was kind of a lot. But first we talked about the purpose of scouting, so match scouting, pit scouting. We went over scouting breakdown, how we scout, how we train our kids. We talked about how we determine our scouting metrics, some tips for how you guys should determine your scouting metrics, what those discussions should look like. We talked about match strategy, to use your data during match strategy. We talked about how we implemented SQL to our team this year, and then how we create our pick list and what pick list discussion should look like. Does anybody have any questions?
Are we all completely, just so much data that you don't even know where to begin?
No questions? Okay, I think we're good then. Thank you guys, appreciate it.
Well, if you want to come and look at any of the apps that we have, or if you want to see how we use SQL, just come up and let us
here.
know.
We'll explain.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.